Let's go.
Next we have our panel, BIM Beyond Design and Construction. BIM has been used for design and construction for over a decade, and we're now seeing data sets used beyond these traditional applications, which we're going to explore in this panel. Our moderator is Anton Dy Buncio. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Anton. He is the co-founder and COO of construction technology firm VIATechnik, where he is currently working on computer vision-enabled concrete crack detection. I'm going to let Anton introduce the panelists, so at this time, please welcome all of our panelists and our moderator to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for that great talk. All I can think about right now are cookies. So we have a great panel here today, and the conversation that we're going to focus on is BIM Beyond Design and Construction. A lot of the previous conversations, or a lot of the conversations happening right now, is how BIM is used on the design and construction side. We sort of want to switch that lens a little bit and say, hey, there's more to BIM than just design and construction, and this is going to change the way the whole foundation of the built environment. Before we begin, why don't we, I have a few questions for the audience. How many of you here are actually using BIM in your day-to-day work? Anyone? Okay. How many of you have heard of it, but sort of don't use it? And how many of you are hearing it for the first time? Okay, cool. So great, diverse audience. So with that, we have an amazing panel here today. Let me introduce some of our awesome panelists. So we have Corey Overton here, who's a native of Queens, a transplant to Atlanta. And he's sort of maybe user number one in Revit, or one of the very early users of Revit. And also, today he's a senior design lead at one of my favorite restaurants, Chic-Fil-A. And then next to Corey, we have Clive Jordan, who has worked, who sort of had very many hats, right? You've been an architect, owner, engineer. You've designed your own island, you've built your own island, you've lived in your own island. And is the founder of LOD Planner, one of the tools that really sets the foundation for BIM. And on the very end, we have Walker Thisted, who started out his career at KPF and was an architect who then transitioned to working at Built Worlds, was one of the leading media planners there, and who now heads business development at the Starchitecture firm FGP. So, my first question to you guys is, can you talk a little bit more about how you got started in the world of BIM, and what was your aha moment where you said, hey, this is actually something really useful? Why don't we start with you, Corey?
So for myself, I started in BIM pretty early, using Revit in 2001. And basically, I really didn't have a choice. So I came into the office, I'd used ADT and AutoCAD and some other tools. And the office I was working at said, BIM is really this interactive database type of modeling environment. We really want to transition to it. And they really just flipped the switch and said, we're going to stop using AutoCAD, we're going to start using BIM, and it was literally overnight. So it was kind of sink or swim. And since I had experience with ADT and some other 3D modeling programs, I kind of took to it naturally. And we had a test in our office on a Friday morning where the principal said, here's a BIM test. Whenever you finish it, you can take the rest of the day off. So I sat down, cracked through it, and I got off at like 11 o'clock and left for the rest of the day. So from then on, I pretty much have been using Revit exclusively. It's been a great program. It's just such a time saver. I couldn't not use it after that. So that was my start in it.
Me next.
Yeah, what about you, Clive?
I suppose, well, 15, 20 years ago, I was working as a civil engineer, and I received an email from headhunters, and it was one of these emails where 3 lines of text, and every single line had the word unique in it. And I was like, I should probably check this out and find out how unique can something be. And so I replied, and one thing led to another, and that was part of the R&D division inside of Graphisoft, kind of the father of BIM in '82, having the world's first, and there's a long story here, but when I went to that role the first day, my eyes opened, and I was like, why haven't we been doing this forever? And I went back to my brother and I said, this is amazing. He works in the chemical industry, in the plant and process. And he said, yeah, we've been doing this for so long. This is not new. I was like, okay, so maybe it's not so unique. And I went back to my wife and I said, Laura, I truly do believe this is the most unique opportunity in design and construction. And I expected her to respond, because she wasn't going to have the response of, that's not new. She said to me, Clive, you know you can't use the words most unique together. And so ever since then, I've been describing BIM and the opportunity in design and construction as the most unique opportunity, because I truly believe that there's something to it. And yeah, I'm pretty passionate, as hopefully you'll hear throughout the conversation. But that was my first experience, and ever since being part of the founding team at Vico, creating this, using BIM for other things, 3D, 4D, 5D, has been just, I've been gripped and love it.
What about you, Walker?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a touch younger than these guys, but when I graduated Cornell in 2007 and joined KPF, the firm was still mostly working in AutoCAD, and most of the projects contractually they were basically delivering drawing sets. But gradually, over the first year or so I was there, we started creating opportunities for people to use Revit and learn Revit, kind of on the side and kind of as just an additional tool to sort of help facilitate the process. But from the first time I really dove into Revit and understood sort of the power of the parametric sort of tools that it offered, it was really clear the incredible value. And then I guess over the next kind of decade of my career, I've sort of seen firms kind of not adopt it quite so passionately as sort of some of my fellow colleagues on the stage have sort of described kind of they're jumping into it. I mean, a lot of the firms I've seen, it's been, kind of 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back, and not a full embrace, in part just because of the entrenched, I guess, traditions and sort of where kind of the information and where all of the knowledge within a firm kind of lies in terms of details, in terms of curtain walls, in terms of planning. A lot of that, knowledge is embedded in sort of CAD standards. And so I've kind of seen gradually that sort of firms transition over. And now I know that KPF is 100% Revit on almost all projects. And then kind of in the context of FGP Atelier, most of our projects, because, again, as I mentioned, sort of a lot of the information sort of is in CAD already, have been designed in CAD, and that's sort of our deliverable to the client, but we'll still sort of give them a Revit model as sort of an additional sort of I guess, service or aspect, but it won't be part of the contractual obligation. That kind of changed for us pretty dramatically when we won the contract to design the new Mexico City International Airport in May. And with that, the contract is really delivering a BIM model to a very specific standard. And I'm happy to talk a little more about that later, but Anton has actually, and VIATechnik has been very helpful in helping us understand sort of exactly what the contractual obligation is and how to really deliver the best model.
So, as you can see from our panelists, BIM's been around for 10, 20 years, and one thing, probably myself and a lot of people are trying to figure out why, can you share more about why the conversation is shifting now, why BIM is so much more valuable than just on the design and construction side? Do you want to share more about that, Corey?
Yeah, I think for us, especially having seen it mature throughout the industry. The last few years, with cloud computing and with a lot of the newer APIs that are coming out, to me, BIM is now capable of doing the things that the design industry said we were doing 10, 15 years ago. So now all those expectations that client have heard in terms of what models can do and a lot of the automation and data extraction, that's all now possible. So to me, that's been the big game changer here in the past few years. And for those of us who have been using it for a while, you know, it's just completely eye-opening, and now we're able to leverage it based on a lot of that previous experience. And I think for folks who are just getting into it, it feels a little more intimidating because of all the different things that are possible. So I kind of found that having that experience gave us some insights, and we're able to take advantage of it a little bit more. So I feel like that's where we are right now.
It's become more mainstream with AR and VR, and it's such a more commercialized and more available for everyone. And so in order to walk through a model, you have to have a model in the first place. And so now having lots of headsets and experiences for everyone, you're not knowing that that is BIM, but that's what's driving those experiences. And now there's a pull from a lot more customers. One of the challenges has always been, you know, living up to this expectation. BIM is going to change the world. BIM is going to provide you instant quantities that you can cost a project, and as soon as you move a wall, not only will that quantity change in the cost, but it will also update the schedule and the sequence and the manpower and the resort, and everything is connected. And now we talk about digital twins, and that is now more commercial. Everyone wants a digital twin. What is a digital twin? It sounds so cool that, you know, BIM is going to change the world. But yeah, the computing power and the software APIs, that's what's now making this actually possible, and some really cool technology on the market to be able to tie that together and make it mainstream, and then hardware to be able to start visualizing and using it in so many different uses. BIM use cases, there are hundreds of BIM use cases, but actually tying that deliverable, the model, to the BIM use case and having a customer for each of those, that's the challenge, or that's some of the challenges that we actually get in the way between the model and the value from that model.
Yeah, and I think for us, you know, the coordination that BIM allows for between all of the different stakeholders in a project is just invaluable, especially on incredibly complex projects. And then kind of beyond that, you know, in these very complex projects, the amount of iterative sort of design that happens and the parameters that go into sort of all the different components of program and structure, and the amount of change that, you know, happens during the course of design, and the fact that all this can be sort of done parametrically, so you don't have to go and redraw every single, you know, wall detail. You can, you know, tie it to a family, which then populates and, you know, affects the entire model. It has been, you know, really invaluable, and, you know, across all stages, from, you know, even the design process all the way to kind of the owner and operating process. It's been something that our clients really enjoy, to, you know, have a model that can then become the basis for building management, especially for our owners who are also our clients, you know, such as the, you know, the Mexican government for the airport. I mean, they will be responsible for this asset for the next 100 years. So to deliver them something that really they can, you know, hit the ground running is incredible.
So Walker, what are the owners saying to you now that they're experiencing, you know, this tool?
Well, I think in large part, it's a matter of efficiency, and, you know, I think there's still a bit of a challenge of converting sort of the BIM model to an O&M platform. It's not always the case that you just, you know, hand them the model and then, you know, you can use it to, you know, maintain all of your mechanical equipment. I mean, there's still a little bit of a gap. I think that there's some work to be done there, but I mean, it's, you know, being able to hand them a model where they know all of the maintenance requirements for all of their machines, and then have just a much smaller gap to kind of really get the building up and running.
It seemed like a natural use case, yeah, for an owner to be able to walk virtually into a building, click on a light, know exactly who supplied it, and when it was installed, what the warranty is, where to get the bulb replacement, click on a button, and then it will be here. But there's a big gap between delivering that model and the owner being able to consume it and use that in the way that it could be used. And so I just kind of being devil's advocate on this, we can produce some great deliverables, we can create great 3D models, we can create huge amounts of data, but having lived it firsthand, implementing for 3 years at an owner, even with an 800 strong maintenance team, and not being very technology savvy, giving them a 3D model doesn't naturally create huge efficiencies. It's interesting, but there's a big gap still. So even though it might be a very relevant and obvious use case for somebody to be able to use a 3D model and walk through and use it for maintaining the building, there's still this big gap. But we do have, thankfully, some educated owners that can do that as well. So there's I don't know whether you wanted to talk more about the difference between
and
types of owner.
You mentioned a gap. We have to address the gap culturally too. So in a lot of cases, you get that BIM model, but there's still the interpretation of the model by folks who want to use the information. Not everybody is a Revit user. Not everyone knows what Revit is. Not everyone is going to even open Revit to get this information. So how do we create that interface that allows this information to be accessible by more people? That's a cultural change, you know. Now we're introducing a new UI. We have to get people out of putting content in their Dropbox and on their personal hard drive and things like that they're comfortable with, and try to make sure that that information gets where it's supposed to be.
Interesting. So Clive mentioned, you know, there's hundreds of use cases out there. Corey, are you able to share sort of what are those use cases that go beyond design and construction from an owner's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think since for Chick-Fil-A in particular, Revit makes a lot of sense because we self-develop our restaurants and we end up maintaining them through the life cycle. So if we're building 150 restaurants a year, it only makes sense for us to capture that data. And the more we use Revit, the more we have different stakeholders throughout the organization saying, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Can I piggyback on what you're doing? So we get approached by everything from marketing to FM to training who want to use models as kind of a walkthrough for potential team members to we just had a discussion with the folks that do the menu inserts, saying it would be great if we could do a walkthrough of our restaurants and we could click on the bracket that the menu gets inserted into so we can know which size of frame of material we need to put in it. So once people start understanding, Clive mentioned the digital twin earlier, once people start understanding the value of having this digital access to the asset, almost everyone has a use case for it.
And it ties it in. So Mike was talking about customer experience, and that really is understanding the customer. The customer is kind of everyone that uses the model, that could use the model. How can you make their experience better, having that 3D model and having all of that data? So the person that wants to understand what sizes of pamphlet or that go into the menus, it's much easier to walk into that restaurant in virtual space, know that you're in the right location because you've clicked on it from the map, and then pick on that specific object and understand that data than it is to trawl through a database or look in an Excel spreadsheet. So providing that customer experience is huge to tying the model to that value. So those use cases, when you grasp one of those, it's great to capture it and be able to really make a big deal about that, because that's when other people go, oh, do you know, I could use the model for understanding the square footage every time we have to re-floor or every time we have to do X, Y, and Z. It makes it a lot easier for other people to understand those uses. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
So it seems like it's, based on what we're hearing here right now, there's a lot of use cases in BIM, but obviously based on what we've seen from the audience, not everyone is in it, even though there's a lot of value in it. How are you seeing people convince their organizations that, hey, this is actually valuable? How do you make that transition? Because obviously it's a pretty big transition.
I mean, I think that's one thing that we're sort of going through right now. And, it's our firm was founded 2 years ago by Francisco Gonzalez Polito after being the president and business partner of Helmut Jahn and Jahn for 18 years. And in the previous context, there was really a lot of resistance to any new technology and any sort of, to BIM really. And in the current context, however, the empowerment has really come from the top, and it's something that Francisco values tremendously. And he's empowered the staff and sort of our CTO to really, implement this, and not just BIM, but to really integrate virtual reality and all sorts of other new kind of technologies. And then, and we've really used this project in Mexico City as kind of a catalyst for really converting the entire office and using the project to build all the families and to kind of transfer a lot of the knowledge. And so I think that, timing is really important because, there is a cost to the transition, but there's also a lot of value that's added in the process.
Yeah, and to touch on the value, that's a big challenge for our industry right now. So I was an architect before coming to work for Chic-Fil-A, and within the design industry, one of our challenges are how do we provide value for owners, and how do we get owners to acknowledge that value? And it really comes down to the data. Once you get good at capturing that data and sharing it, it becomes a question of how confident are you that your design is going to produce what you say it's going to produce? How confident are you that you can measure how much more successful this design is going to make your owner, or how much more happy the occupants are going to be, or how much less your utility bill is going to be? All the things that we as designers promise, if we can quantify that, and if we can get that to an owner in a way that says, you will see these successes, then we can turn around and say to an owner, and when you do see those successes, we want to share in that. Maybe we defer some of our fees until you actually see that. So if we're, as a design community, willing to kind of put our money where our mouth is with the claims that we make in terms of design, we can start to see that and address the way the contracts are written in a way that honestly we have to do, because somebody mentioned WeWork earlier. So the WeWorks and the startups and teams who are figuring out how to automate a lot of this design, they're here. They're not just coming. So we need to figure out as an industry, how do we make that success tangible and quantifiable?
I loved an experience about 10, 12 years ago. We were talking with an owner, and it was introducing them to BIM and saying, this is going to save you so much money, and this is the way that, and he basically said, okay, well, show me and actually write me down. So how am I going to get this saving? Now that's a challenge to actually work out and to put it down in writing. There are so many returns on investment, but the model actually has to be used. And as you go through this transition, there's a lot of training going on. There's a lot of education within the organization until you get groundswell and then top-down push. It's really going to be tough. And
Well, no, I was also going to add, the way you mentioned sort of contracts and the way that they're written, and we're really only coming up on like sort of the first 10 years of sort of integrated project delivery contracts, like having matured and actually seeing the effects of these projects and actually getting data to sort of see, oh wow, no, that project performed 50% better than this non-integrated project. And I think that there's a conversation to be had about the relationship between sort of BIM as a communication and collaboration tool and kind of a more integrated project delivery approach. And you sort of touched on the idea of like sharing in risk and sort of gaining some of the rewards. And I think that whenever we can, we try and push our clients towards more of an integrated approach, bring on all of the partners earlier, even the contractor, to really test assumptions and deliver a better project faster.
You don't often get the opportunity to compare projects. I was in very, very fortunate position where, as an owner, we had two projects, virtually identical, starting at the same time, and we could implement BIM and a better workflow on one. And not that we ignored the other one, but just based on the amount of resources that we had, we could only pick one. And the results were phenomenal. It was so 73% fewer issues. That is a statistic that we've got all of the data behind. The frustrating thing is, you can look it up, but I can't share who that was. I've only worked for one owner, so maybe you can.
So now we know. Go in his LinkedIn profile. So I'll ask one last question before we open up the floor to questions from the audience. Again, BIM, something we've talked about for a while. how do you guys, let's pretend a year from now we're back here on stage. What's going to change about the conversation we're having right now?
Well, I think for me, the use of APIs and all the different ways to collect data is going to look a lot different next year. I think our industry is moving towards an area where, and Kyle and I were talking about this earlier, you're going to have different apps and different specialty ways of doing things. And the challenge is going to be that we have all these capabilities, but how do we connect them all? And how do we make sure that all the data talks to each other? So it's a different challenge from kind of the production-minded mindset that we've traditionally been in.
Hopefully we'll have more people that understand what BIM can do for our design and construction industry. And anybody that you can share this good word with, please do, because there are so many benefits to be had. But my piece of advice would be just to focus on a few, because it can get overwhelming, because there's so much potential benefit. So trying to focus on what will be useful for a customer and providing better end user experience, that would be hopefully the result in a year's time. More happy customers as a result of BIM.
Yep, very cool.
And I would just say, I would hope that we as a firm are working with more clients who are really bought into sort of the value of BIM, and also are looking for more ways to, get value out of BIM, whether it's, a way of helping to lease spaces or help their clients customize an apartment. We'd love to find owners who really are interested in, pushing the limits of what BIM can do.
Very cool. With that, we have our panel. Why don't we open up to questions from the audience right over there?
I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of it, and Clive mentioned it earlier, is that you have to start to collect the data and then get to the point where you can analyze it. So in the beginning, it's kind of a leap of faith to know that this data is going to have that use case in the future, but it's definitely, that's where it's headed.
It's really difficult for me to say no, because it just is, for me, when I look at our world, having a digital representation that is built before you go and build on site to find all of the issues, and everything is loaded with you have quantities and cost and schedule, and have everything interrelated. It makes so much sense to do that in my own mind. 15 years ago, my first startup, which we sold to Trimble and is still a 5D application, it uses a 3D model to generate quantities that influence cost, that influence resources and schedule, and all of that is tied together. So if you do change one, it does affect everything else. But even though that does seem like a natural thing to occur, we as an industry of design and construction have so many silos that you have to cross. It's a real challenge, and it's mostly a people challenge. The technology is there. It's really an opportunity for us to grasp and to do something valuable with. But there are some really major obstacles in the way, and that's a culture. So more and more teams that are embracing and having top-down change, that's where we'll see it, and that's where we'll see the benefit.
I think to add to that, if you think about a construction project, a small project's about $50 million. And it's just funny that people haven't had a good way to understand cost and schedule. So you think about you're spending $50 million and you don't know what it's really going to cost and how long it's going to take. Ultimately, now there's a tool that will help make that happen. And I think it's a no-brainer that it's going to be extremely valuable.
But it has to be used in the right way. So we have the term evil BIM. You can actually use it in a very bad way and use it to increase your change orders, or to essentially do the opposite of this open BIM and useful BIM and collaborative BIM. And so how to do that it's not just the culture change, it's also a contract change. You talked about IPD and shared risk, and that's where we'll be able to leverage BIM in the best way to be able to get the best results.
Great. Unfortunately, lots of hands, but we're pretty much out of time. Feel free to reach out to our great set of panelists up here. We'll be around all day, I think. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.